Again, I want to welcome you to the Rice Traders YouTube review of the July 23rd Rice Trader. As always, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jeremy Zwinger, the president of the company. As many of you know, just to kind of jump into the action this week, it has been a more active week. Lo and behold, the World Cup is over, and we're starting to see some action in the market, especially in Asia. So it definitely seen more action. So what are some of the key points when I read the Rice Trader this week that come out to me? And what are some of the key points in the market that I see? Well, let's start out with demand. Demand's been very good. In fact, we have record demand through July 17th, where we do our vessel data. We're up almost 2% on last year. But what you don't see in that number, which of course is in section 3 of the Rice Trader, for those of you who like to look at the data like me, we've definitely decelerated in our demand. And you can see that when you start to look at Africa compared to last year. You know, we were up as much as about 5% in the year. So now you're definitely deaccelerating your demand, and we're looking for trade. That makes me jump almost back to the US a little bit. You know, we see this with US trade and the high supply. You know, again, this is the highest supply we've seen since 2000 in the rice trade and the wheat trade. If you combine the two fundamentals, it's extremely large supply. And I believe you're going to see players struggle to find demand for this large supply. It will start especially in the US, where, as we mentioned last week, US is off 30% in Mexico, their key market, and 33% off on here in Central America. In Mexico, it's very interesting. They're allowing non-tariff trade from any origin, 150,000 tons, which is probably going to increase next year. And China has actually sent several shipments there, which is very interesting with this Chinese old crop. You know, how much Chinese old crop is going into the market. You know, is it 3 million tons, is it 2 million tons, is it 4 million tons? You know, this is a key question the market is asking. But you're definitely seeing an effect in the US. As last week, I'm going to continue my call of US rice futures. In fact, I nearly put a large bet myself on it, but the Rice Trader has never played the futures market, and we're going to hold to that. But I think you're going to go below $10 a hundredweight on the US rice futures. Some people say it could go as low as $8. You know, currently the US is still indicated about $570 per metric ton versus Thai being at about $380 for 5%. So, you know, to kind of wrap that back, you know, we talked about prices and demand being not as high as we need and supply is being so huge. You know, on the week we see this in other origins catching up to compete with the very, very beneficial and aggressive pricing in Thailand. You know, you see a reduction in Vietnam down to $385 for high quality. You know, Pakistan dropped $20 a ton for $400, and India dropped about another $10 a ton to $395. So you're seeing a convergence of the Asian origins, but still this huge premium for the US, which is not as good as quality as Asian rice. I see a very difficult year for the Americans with a larger crop and all the issues going on. And I think that's a good headway into some of the issues. You have to look at this as probably the most interesting time in the last 20-30 years as far as politics. Just as the US perspective, there's now a 25% tariff in Europe, and that's retroactive even if they won the tariff-free auctions. There's a 25% tariff for goods into Turkey. There's a 25% tariff into China. In addition to the price being so high, this is going to keep the US out of certain regions. And I think Europe is probably the key one that's really going to cause some issues. So these political barriers are going to add to the heavy supplies, and I just don't see anywhere where prices to go but down. It's going to be a difficult year unless there's a big crop failure somewhere. You know, to put it in perspective, they put 100% tariff on walnuts out of California, which is also critical because it competes with rice acres here. And so it's just a very interesting time for the US and the world as far as politics. If I wrap myself back to the TRT, what are some other key points that we highlight throughout the many sections? I think you have to look, of course, at what's going on in the Philippines. There's talk of another 500 to 1 million metric tons going to them. Pretty standard business, whether officially or unofficial trade, but definitely there's talk on it. The Egyptian news story is talking about them buying 500 to 700,000 tons in the next year, and talk of maybe being paddy, which would indicate japonica rice, probably out of the south or from Vietnam. But I don't really see Vietnam trading paddy. If it ends up being paddy, definitely a milled rice place for the Vietnamese rice. In addition, kind of a segue to that and the medium grain markets, you definitely see Vietnamese rice being very aggressive. They bid on the short grain section of the Korean tenders. You're seeing rice from Vietnam show up in samples in various places. We've seen rice from China as well in sample in Turkey, and shipments go to Puerto Rico of medium grain, short grain rice out of China. So a very difficult time for the medium grain japonica market for sure. What else? We continue to see heavy activity throughout the market, and definitely there's price competition between the grains and rice. We do have a special section on Thailand that goes much more in depth to the Thai activities and the shipments. You know, Thailand is up almost 2% on the year and running for a record year, and they may still catch India. India seems to be slowing. They are about 800,000 tons higher right now, over halfway through the year. But definitely Thailand continues to press with these prices, and they may actually catch that Indian run as it slows down and may overtake them just barely at the end of the year. We'll see. In addition to that, we also have a review of prices. As we've talked, you know, prices do look down. We've talked about it before. We see laying going on in Africa, and this is definitely in section 10 where there's much more depth, and I can only hit the key pieces. You know, we're seeing weakness for sure in fragrant prices. The crop is going to be very large in fragrant. We knew this. Several players were saying prices at planting were so high there had to be a huge supply coming, and you're definitely seeing that in Thailand and other areas. We do see some weakness there. That will follow the price. And there is indications by certain players that regular, like 5%, could drop as low as 330, 340. And definitely even more weakness in the fragrant. It won't obviously get that low, but it definitely will also follow that direction. You're seeing basmati be a bit better in prices, and definitely you're kind of at a peak, a short-term peak. But overall, the complex is weak. We haven't seen the largest supplies since 2000, and you should expect issues like that. We haven't seen politics like this probably since the late 80s. For those elders in the industry, you probably know better than many of us what it felt like in the 80s, how difficult it was to trade, and there's definitely things to be learned from those early 90s and 1980s, late 80s lessons that the market occurred. For a lot of us, this is new to see government interference in trade at a level we haven't seen in decades. You're also seeing parboiled prices be very weak. There's just a lot of parboiled production throughout the world. It's just following the fragrance. They're just not as much demand versus a large supply and new suppliers all the time. It's just not a lot of activity for the parboiled market. And then again, there's many graphs that show the longer term and short term trend, but definitely we see prices looking down, which is what the major grains are showing as well. With that, I can talk on and on about what's going on in each region, but it's a very interesting market that's picking up. Of course, I want to invite you to our World Rice Conference in Hanoi, October 10 to 12. We're also throwing a chef Lord of Rice contest, and actually the best rice beer contest Labor Day in the US. That's September 3rd. We'd love to have you guys come out to that too. Let us know, and we'd definitely host you and show you the Rice Valley in California as well. With that, I think I'm going to sign off. Again, this is just a tidbit of what's in the Rice Trader. We'll be putting it out here just in several hours, and we look forward to talking to you.